Welcome to Reddit Aliens. What are some downright disturbing facts that you know, not safe for work? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. During World War II, Japan bombed China with fleas infected with the bubonic plague. Only 1% of arsonists are convicted. Only 10% of arsons are even solved. Hundreds of dead babies were found in the septic tank of a mother and baby home in Tuam, Ireland. No one has any idea how many children died under the system countrywide, or how many children were forcibly taken from their mothers and sold to childless families abroad. In the old days, poor people would sell their teeth to rich people. I recently learned this, and maybe I'm stupid for not knowing already. The human has two anal sphincters. The first one we have no control over, but the second one, of course, we can control. When the stool comes through the first sphincter, the urge to go to the bathroom is felt. Ever thought about how whales and dolphins die? When they get too old and too weak to swim up to the surface to breathe, they start to slowly sink towards the deep, cold depths of the ocean and suffocate in the dark. Lobotomies were a complete guessing game, and the procedure's success was mostly based on whether or not the patient was deemed calm and quiet post-surgery. Walter Freeman, the man who popularized lobotomies in America, wasn't even a surgeon. He had to partner with an actual surgeon to attempt the procedure. But Freeman didn't care for the length of the surgery, so he invented the ice pick lobotomy. You use an ice pick to access the brain by hammering the pick through the bone above the eye and near the nose, and then just wiggling it around. As stated before, Freeman was not a surgeon. So when the actual surgeon he partnered with walked into their shared office to find Freeman with an ice pick halfway in a patient's brain, their partnership ended immediately. But that didn't stop Freeman from continuing his work with lobotomies. He toured the nation in a van he called the Lobotomobile, offering the procedure to insane asylums with problem patients. Freeman completed over 3,000 lobotomies throughout his career, of which nearly 500 patients died and thousands were left in a vegetative state. When filming Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory in Germany 1970-71, they had trouble casting the Oompa Loompas, as people who suffered with disabilities were simply killed by the Nazis during the war. In the early hours of September 26, 1983, a false alarm at a Soviet bunker indicated the launch of multiple American nuclear missiles. Everyone in the bunker except for one man, Stanislav Petrov, thought it was a real attack, but Petrov correctly assumed that if the USA was to launch an attack, it would have been hundreds of bombs, leading him to not tell higher-ups, who likely would have ordered a counterattack, leading to nuclear war, about the missiles likely saving billions of lives. TL, Doctor. We were a single person's decision away from a full-out nuclear war. In the 90s, a British Airways pilot was sucked out of the cockpit at 23,000 feet due to a poorly installed window seal failure, and he got pinned against the airplane as the flight attendants tried to keep him from completely getting sucked away, but he survived, suffering only a few bone fractures and frostbite. When the German battleship Bismarck went down after hours of constant battering, 1,500 of the 2,000-man crew were able to jump into the ocean. The Royal Navy rescued 500 of them, but left early due to lack of fuel and the threat of submarines. Over 1,000 men were left on the ocean to die, having just survived pure hell. Today, the area of the wreck is littered with thousands of leather boots, having once belonged to the crew, which died because they were abandoned. The average age of the crew was a little over 20 years. The word mortgage comes from a French term that means death pledge, or a contract that only expires upon death. Relatable. Weirs are drowning machines. Those tiny dams you see on rivers are shaped like this, kind of, under the water, and this shape causes a circular flow of water. As the water circulates, it gets aerated, lowering the density. So if you swim in one, not only are you trapped on the longest spin cycle, but you can't get out because the water isn't dense enough to swim in. The crew of Challenger likely survived over a minute after the initial explosion. They were killed by the impact on the water. There's evidence that members of the crew even started trying to complete emergency procedures. SUDEP, sudden unexpected death in epilepsy. There's a small chance, 1 in 1,000 per year on average, that someone with epilepsy will just die during their sleep. There are a lot of theories, but no real reason for this has ever been found. There's like 30-something nuclear warheads that are just out there unaccounted for. The Japanese brutalities during the Nanjing massacre were so extreme, the head Nazi representative in the region complained directly to Hitler about it. There are more bones in gummy worms than actual worms. A hoarder had her house filled so much she didn't even notice that her son had passed in her home. NASA was once talking with Sesame Street to send Big Bird into space on the Challenger rocket, but they went with a teacher instead, which means that in an alternate universe close to ours, Big Bird was a casualty in the Challenger disaster. In 1972, a plane crashed in the Andes on a snowy mountain. 16 of the 45, mostly guys of a rugby team from Uruguay, survived there for 72 days. They had to eat the human flesh of the people who died during or after the crash in order to survive. No one knew where the plane crashed exactly, and they were only found because 2 of the guys walked for 10 days over the mountains and down into a valley where a farmer found them. The movie Alive. Chlamydia is so rampant among koalas that some populations have tested 100% positive, and it's one of the main reasons the koala population is decreasing. You can get rabies without even realizing it and won't get a diagnosis until it's far too late to treat it. Inuit have one of the highest suicide rates in the world. In Canada, the incidence is 10 times that of the rate of the rest of the Canadian population. Inuit 25 and under are driving the rate. One large study found that 80% of the suicides were by hanging. The same study found that about 1 in 6 of those who died by suicide were victims of sexual abuse. Since 1970, the number of fish in the world's oceans has declined by over 50%. I think a similar pattern basically holds for all life on Earth. Insects, birds, mammals, all down by 50 to 70% since 1970, not humans. I could be butchering some of these details since it's been a while since I learned about it, but there's this amoeba that's super rare, found in fresh water, and people who go swimming have an extremely unlikely chance of contracting, but if they do, it will pretty much obliterate your brain and kill you, and there's pretty much nothing you can do about it. In Japan, 1945, 144 Dutch soldiers were beheaded after being forced to watch their wives getting hacked to death with swords and their children being thrown down a mine shaft. Those were different times. When Japan Airlines Flight 123 suffered a sudden decompression and crashed at Mount Otsukaka, after 32 minutes of struggling, the initial forward team that went to assess the situation saw an area they thought was completely devoid of life, and they went by helicopter. They waited until the next day to go there, not expecting anyone to have survived. There were, in fact, many people who could have survived had they received appropriate care. The only 4 survivors relate that they heard the cries and moans of the wounded, including children, that gradually died off throughout the night until the next day. In the 1940s, before the bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, the US made around 1.5 million Purple Hearts in anticipation of casualties. Since the bombings occurred, there was quite a surplus of hearts left over. Thus, some of those very hearts are still given out to this day.